reading the first Muirwood book in one sitting. And he's like, this reminds me of the fantasy of my teenage days. Like, this is the kind of stuff I like to read. And so he got their permission and they reached out to me and they offered me a 6-book deal. The 3 books that I had self-published and the next trilogy that I was writing. And I was like, I was at my day job. I was in a meeting at Intel when this email comes in, like, we'd like to talk to you about acquiring your series. And the last thing I wanted to do was be on a phone call with a peer. And I just couldn't wait. I remember I sent the email to my wife and she wrote back like, like, what's going on? We've been waiting for.
Hi everyone, I am Julie Edmonds, your host of Channeled, tapping into the wisdom of your soul. All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Channeled, tapping into the inner wisdom of your soul. I am completely honored today to have a best-selling author who's touched millions of hearts, our very own Jeff Willer. So, hi Jeff, how are you?
Doing great. It's great to be here with you, Julie. I'm excited.
Jeff is a creative force behind over 30 novels, including The Legends of Merwood and the King Fountain series, and his books have sold over 7 million copies. Beyond the magic and kingdoms, Jeff's work is known for weaving in deep moral truths, spiritual undertones, and timeless wisdom. So he's not just a writer, he's a world builder, a spiritual seeker, and a mentor to aspiring authors who want to create with purpose. So today we're diving into his journey from tech executive to full-time author, how his muse guides his creative process. Hi Jeff, how are you?
Doing great. It's awesome to be here, and this is going to be a lot of fun. So I've been looking forward to it.
Good, good, good. I love these things. My favorite things to do. So we're going to just dive right in. We're going to start with the origin of the muse. So Jeff, you've written over 30 novels, which is pretty amazing. And I look up to that, and I'm very inspired by that. And you've built so many worlds. Tell us your journey. Like, how did you start? Did you always know writing was in your soul? I know you had a big tech career prior to becoming a full-time author.
Well, the tech career was more of an accident. I definitely wanted to be an author as early as like high school. That's when I think the bug kind of bit me, and I've noticed that with other authors that there's just something about it that makes you want to do it. So I wrote 5 novels in high school just for fun. That doesn't count the 30 that I've published. Those are just ones that I did for fun. There was no credit for any of my classes. But just that bug of creating and writing stories kind of struck me, and I kind of envisioned myself someday being an author. And so when I was going to college, I took every creative writing class that I could, but you know that wasn't paying the bills. So I ended up getting a job at Intel just as a temp. Because I could type so fast and I knew how to use the different software packages they were using. So I ended up staying at Intel for 21 years. But all the while, I was writing like fantasy stories in my spare time.
Well, I love that you do that. You tap into your passion even in this corporate job. You continue to have that creative process flow. So many people block that. So many people just like cut it off because they have to make money and they have to have this job and maybe society told them they need to do this. Can you speak to that for a minute on how you always tapped into that creative process and then eventually just made it your full-time job? Because from how you speak with such passion and excitement, I know that writing is like just, you're a soul-driven purpose.
Thank you. And it is. And for some people, like writing is a horrible chore, right? It's very difficult and challenging for them. And I found that to be true for writing like academic things. Like one of my thoughts I had in college was maybe I'll be a history professor and I'll teach, as a way of providing for, my family and things. But writing academic writing just it killed my soul. Like it was so hard and challenging for me. But writing creatively, writing fiction is something that replenishes me, and it still does that today. So, as I give advice to other authors and stuff, is you've got to do it because you like the process. You've got to enjoy doing that. Some people like, I'd rather hit me on the head with a hammer than write 10,000 words, let alone write a novel every couple of months. So for me, it was something I was trying to prioritize with all the responsibilities that I had of, being a dad, being a spouse, having a job in a very high intensity tech career. I found writing replenished me so that when I do my writing sessions, I felt uplifted. It didn't feel like a chore at all. It felt very good. So for me, it was something that kind of replenished my energy. It didn't deplete it at all. A lot of the other things in my life was depleting
Right.
for it. So for me, finding that muse, that ability to create, brought something to my life that didn't exist. And so if I went for a time without writing, and sometimes I did, I published a magazine with some of my friends for fantasy short stories and science fiction short stories. And when I was running that magazine, I had less and less time to write, and I just felt like I was starving. I was missing something. And it wasn't until I wrote my own stories that that feeling started to come back. So for me, whether it's music or art or writing, we all have something creative within us that if we explore that, it replenishes, it kind of fills up our energy banks. And that's what we need to find out what that is for us and to be able to harness that.
I had chills when you said that. It's like so important to tap into what lights you up inside and gives you energy because so many things deplete us. And I love creative writing and journaling and I've been on this process. And I have a job. I have a sales consultant job and hypnotherapist for years and years and always tapped into some spirituality, but I picked up this novel. I'm sorry. I picked up writing a novel and put it down, tried to write my novel, put it down for so long. And I think it was only just recently through my hypnotherapy journey of removing blocks because it's a little controversial, the topic. So I had to remove blocks so that I could like feel free to just write and not worry about what other people think. So what can you say for that? I'm sure that there's been times where you were writing something. Do you just let go and just let it flow and don't worry about, how it ends up and how people hear? I mean, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's a struggle most authors and creatives have that I really do subscribe to. We kind of have two parts of our brain. We have kind of the creative side and we kind of have a logical side.
Right.
And I call it, we have the writer brain and we have the editor brain. And each one serves a purpose, but they need to have a turn. And so when I am creating something, I turn off that editor side of my brain. I don't want to hear about you use that word too often, or no one's going to like this, or "Oh, I could have probably said that better. And then let me go fix it." No, no, no. I turn off. It's like I turn the volume to zero while I'm creating because it's like let my creative brain go and let me try to get it into a flow state. And we can talk about that a little bit if you'd like, but get into a flow state where the words are coming and you're able to just, for me, my goal is to write a chapter during my writing session. So I will start and I will finish and I won't stop until I've written that chapter.
And you don't
And
care if you misspell something or say a
no,
wrong vocabulary, it just goes, right?
yeah, I mean, unless like, there's some words I cannot properly spell. Like even after all these years, the word that comes to my brain, I'm like maneuver. Like I can never spell that word correctly. Um, but I don't think about that. I don't think about trying to spell it correctly. I think about I'm going to catch that and edit. So I work on building the story. And then when I was doing it part-time and working for Intel, I used to write a chapter and then I would reread the chapter before I wrote the next one because I was doing it like a week apart. And that would be helpful to me to kind of get back into the scene. I found today I don't even reread until I get to the end.
Wow.
Like I will write the whole novel and then I won't start rereading it and editing until I get to the end. And then I'll turn off the creative side, turn on the editor side, and then look at it like, okay, how can I say this differently? Or sometimes I'll have the experience, I'm reading it and I'll think of, oh, I need to say this. And then I'll find it two sentences later. So it's like, okay, it matches up. Like my instincts were telling me that this needed to be said. So maybe I just need to bump this up a couple lines earlier because my instincts were telling me to do that. But that editorial side, I think, is really it's helpful, it's useful, but it's not, it clashes with the creative side if you try to do it simultaneously. So I always advise people focus on the creative writing part first, and then at period, whatever, iteration works best for you, whether process works best for you, do the editing side later where you're using a different critical side of your brain and fix those things because anything you write you can make better and you don't have to beat yourself up because it's not perfect on the first cut because what is?
Right. You sound like that is so easy to do. And maybe it's just natural, or maybe you've had to build that muscle over time, or just turn down that left brain, that logical, that editorial side. Do you have a practice or something that maybe that you did in the beginning that people that are maybe struggling with, wait, hold on, I misspelled that. Wait, hold on. No, let's go back to the creative side. You said flow. Can you speak to that a little more? I would love to hear more about that.
So flow's part of it, but also another important topic is imposter syndrome, right? um, it is very easy. And I know best-selling authors who struggle with imposter syndrome, and I think a lot of people do. That's not your editor's voice. Okay. That's I don't want to tune into that voice at all.
Ever.
The self-doubt, the is anybody gonna like this? I mean, we write because we want to tell stories, we want to share experiences, we want to move people. That should be the motive, not, oh, I want to do this because it's a way of making money. I want to do this because, I want people to think I'm cool.
Right.
Those are the wrong motives and stuff I mean, it's a very long, lonely profession. If you got to have the right reasons to be doing this. But that imposter syndrome, that self-criticism, that's not helpful. I try when those kind of thoughts come, I try to just knock them away completely. And I
What do
get a
you
lot of
say?
that
Do you
from
like just say go away or you just block it out or what do you
I
do?
just, I just, to me, I just kind of think about when I was at Intel, I remember this class I attended, and one of the instructors said, just imagine like a big delete key on your keyboard, right? When those negative thoughts come about what you're working on, they're never helpful. Negative thoughts are never helpful, and so you just hit the delete button, delete those thoughts logical thoughts, editorial thoughts. How can I make this word choice better? That's not negative. That's improving. That's going to make the product better. But to read a page and to say, "Oh, this is garbage." Well, that doesn't help. Read a page and say, how can I make this better? How can I increase the tension? How can I make this more clear? How can I, make this more impactful? That's all positive. So your editor side of the brain can be helpful. So I try, but again, when the editor part of my brain tries to jump in, like, oh, there's a better word for this, the creative side of my brain says, just put a little note, a hashtag or something next to it to fix it later. But
Okay.
don't spend time trying to fix it now. I
Hashtag. I
mean,
love that advice. Just put a little check mark, a hashtag, a highlight, something. We'll come back.
something that you'll catch later when you're editing to go, yeah, like, oh yeah, this was an area that that rather than spending 15 minutes to find the right word, I'll spend that 15 minutes later to find the right word. And so I'll tag it with a comment or I'll make a symbol to just remind myself that I want to that there was another word that maybe I had in mind that I couldn't think of at the moment. and fix it later. But let the editor side have its turn and let the creative side have its turn. But don't let them have the same turn because then you're being pulled two different directions. And it's easier for me to get into a flow state when I don't have the editor trying to improve things as I'm going. I'm trying to accomplish the mission of what that chapter is supposed to be.
So, speaking of world building, so you have dove into this world of fantasy, and I know you're stepping out of your comfort zone to thrillers. It sounds like we'll get to that in a minute. Why fantasy? Why did you choose fantasy? Or did it choose you?
It was kind of a mutual love. The novels I wrote in high school would probably be considered thrillers, right? It was action adventure. There was car chases, guns, fighting, ninjas, things like that. And so that's what I was writing about. But I found that it required a lot more research to be able to make things realistic and make things fit in this world. Or if I was writing historical, it takes a ton of research to be able to look at, okay, what would it be like to live in 15th century Paris? That takes a lot of homework. With fantasy, I can take the things I like from this world and use them and create something new. So a lot of my fantasy novels are based on something historical in this world. For example, my King Fountain series, which is my top selling series. I have a master's in medieval history, and I loved the period of the War of the Roses in England. And I studied the life of King Richard III, and I don't believe he's the villain that Shakespeare, made in his play 100 years later, right? I've studied the original documents and things of when he lived, but he lost his throne in this famous battle of called Bosworth Field, and my King Fountain series begins with what if Richard hadn't lost
Ooh,
that battle? Because having studied history, you've got the Tudor dynasty that came after that, like Henry VII, Henry VIII, who, really revolutionized things. Elizabeth the first,
I love what they wore.
oh yeah, yeah, very, very, very fancy outfits and stuff. But how would have history gone differently if this event, if the hinges had swung a different way? So many of my fantasy novels are based on a what if things went a different way, and then I use a lot of that study and research I've done during my history degree to kind of, create a setting, and then I would create a magic system and do all those things. But really, it's just finding characters and weaving things in together. So for me, fantasy allowed my imagination to be less constrained by things as they actually happen. I love historical fiction. I love, writers, but you're constrained. You can't really change what happened, even though it might make a more satisfying conclusion, but you're stuck with what actually happened.
Yeah.
So a lot of my novels are inspired by real historical events that I've then modified and turned into a fantasy world.
Yeah, well, I mean that wow. Wow. I have a fun question for you because obviously you come up with all these amazing, amazing magical ideas. And who do you have a favorite character in any of your books or a favorite book? And can you speak to that and why?
Oh my gosh, that's so hard, right? Because um, there's certain elements of characters in all my series that I love the most, and um, I think one of my most favorite, it comes from my King Fountain series, and this character was inspired by that deep dive I had done into history. So, to get into a little bit of the weeds, just a little bit, so you understand it, right? I studied the lives of the nobles, the kings and the queens, and the princes and the princesses and stuff, and there was this character named George, the Duke of Clarence, and he was just horrible. I mean, he betrayed his brother, the king. He sided with an enemy, and he's just even in the Shakespeare play, he gets drowned in a big jug of wine, just because and that's like historical. They believe he might have actually been drowned in wine. Um, but in the record, as I was studying this time, he accused his wife's servant of attempting trying to poison him,
Ooh.
right? And she ends up getting poisoned and she ends up dying. And so he has this woman arrested, even though he has no authority to arrest her, and has her executed on his own authority. And because he did that, that's why, the king, Edward IV, had to arrest him because he basically took over, like he took kingly authority onto himself. He's not allowed to, I'm not allowed to be judge, jury, and executioner. That's the king's job. And so his brother ended up getting killed. And that led to the question of who was this woman that was accused of poisoning his wife. And she ended up becoming one of my fans' all-time favorite characters. And I named a novel after her, The Queen's Poisoner. And her name is Anchoret. And in my version of she was a poisoner. She did try to kill him and ended up killing his wife instead. And so she's got this wonderfully tragic story, and I was able to rewrite her story. But I love her because she's kind of like the James Bond of the 1500s, of just being, kind of this whole, Machiavellian uh, diplomat, spy, poisoner, but she's trying to protect the throne and trying to protect the protagonist of the Queen's Poisoner, who's an 8-year-old little boy,
Oh.
who was being held hostage by the king for his dad's treason, and if his parents make any mistakes, this 8-year-old's life is on the line, and this poisoner is trying to help keep him alive. And that to me, that story between these two characters has been my probably my all-time favorite. And it was found in the weeds of studying history and just saying, well, what if she was really trying to kill him
That is so fun. That is
instead of
so
that?
fun.
You just find these things, and to me, that has turned into a multi-novel series. And every time I write about Anchoret, I love her. I love her story.
Do you feel that those characters start just like talking to you and telling you, write my story? Do you feel like they just make this like story or movie of their own type of thing? Or do you already have it sort of thought out ahead of time? I know you talked about the creative flow. So I know you probably have an outline. I'm not sure. Maybe you don't. But when you have those types of characters, do they just create a life of their own?
They do, and I've noticed that hanging out with other authors too, that some of our best friends are people that are in our heads that did we invent them or did they find us? And and again, it was reading about Anchoret, right? Reading about her story and wondering like was she this real person in history and maybe she had a bigger role than taking down the Duke of Clarence. But yeah, like often in some of my series, the characters will make choices that I, the author, don't think they should make.
Wow.
And I want to write it a certain way, but like the characters won't do it. Like when I was writing my Muirwood series, I had originally planned that these two kind of orphans at the Abbey were going to go on this quest with a squire, and one of them refused to go on the quest. In
And,
fact, she
and
went
that
and
just came
told
about. That just came about. That wasn't the
yeah,
original.
my plans was she was going to go along, and instead of going on the
Said
quest,
no.
she went and told the authority figure that there's something was going on. I'm like, why are you doing this? I'm the author. You should be doing what I want you to do. But she had her own plans and wrote herself out of those scenes because she really
Wow.
felt the right thing to do would be to go tell somebody that something dangerous is about to happen. And and so I just went with it, right? I just
So how
went
does
with
that happen? Like, how do you just allow that? I love that. I love that. And that's probably in the state of flow. We call that in hypnotherapy, getting into that alpha brainwave, sort of tapping in to the subconscious, letting it just speak, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I have found that in those moments when I've trusted those instincts, like I can always rewrite things.
Right.
But by taking that deviation, by like, and I do generally outline. I have a plot arc I'm trying to achieve across the series, but I don't plan every twist and turn. I don't plan every detour. I just kind of kind of keep going along the course of where I want it to go. But I allow those for those little, serendipitous moments to come. And I've learned to trust them. When a character's speaking that loudly and that strongly, trust it and see what happens because you can always fix it in edits later.
And how do you
And
hear that? How do you hear that? How do you hear? You said when they're speaking loud.
Well, like when I'm writing the story and I'm feeling like this character would do this, not what I had planned, but they would do something differently. When I'm in that moment, I just sometimes I'll just go along with it. I'll just say, okay, I'll trust that. I'll trust the process. I'll trust that inner voice that's kind of guiding me and not try to fight it. Because when I fight it, that's when I end up, painting myself into a corner and have to fix something with a lot of rewrites later.
You wrote several books in high school. Do you ever read those back? And does that, how is that different? Besides that was thriller and then you moved into fantasy. Besides that, how is it different from your writing today?
Oh, it's so different. I still have copies of all those original things. And I think the only people who have read my early stuff is my wife and my sister. And they're the only ones that are going to be able to read it. Because, if every once in a while, if I pull it out and look at it, I cringe, of course, because, it takes practice to get good at anything. Like Malcolm Gladwell says, it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert in anything that you want to do. I equate that 10,000 hours to a million words. One of my author mentors used that. Like you need a million words under your belt to get familiar with language and the craft and all those things. And after I heard him say that, I went back and I tallied up everything I'd written in high school, shorts, those novels, short stories, other novels I'd written in college, and it came up to like 980,000 words. And I'm like, so
20,000 more.
all of this has been practice. And so I threw it all away. Like not literally, I didn't hit the delete button, but I said, I'm not going to try to fix any of this anymore. Because that's what I kept doing. I kept rewriting. I kept rewriting.
Yeah.
One of these is going to become successful. Maybe one of these. If I just rewrite it again, maybe the next iteration is gonna be what it takes. I threw it all in the trash can, metaphorically, like I'm not gonna edit this anymore. And the next thing I wrote was The Wretched of Muirwood. And that was the book that landed me my publishing deal. And
Wow.
it was literally I'd hit my first million words writing that novel because I took
Wow.
everything I'd
Okay, you hit
learned.
your first million words. When I say first million words, and then that was the one.
That was the book that landed me my publishing contract with Amazon Publishing.
And how did that happen? I'm sure a lot of people,
Oh,
they are like, I want my book to be famous.
well, it's like an overnight success story that took 20 years,
Right.
right? So all these novels, all these things. So I tried to go the traditional route. I submitted to 50 different agents. One of them wanted to see it. One of them read the whole manuscript and then turned it down. I mean, you got to have a thick skin and be used to rejection in this line of work for sure. And so I kind of like got frustrated trying to publish it the traditional route. But I was sharing it with, family and friends, and everyone I was sharing Muirwood with was like, "Can I share it with this other friend? I think they'd like it." I'm like, "Okay, you can share it with one other person." I made them promise only share it with people that I allow you to. And then they would want to share it with somebody, and then they would want to share it with somebody. And everyone wanted to read it, but finally, I'm like, why don't I just self-publish it? Why don't I get it out into the world so that way I don't have to worry about somebody taking my Word document and passing it off as their own. Let me self-publish it. So I used Amazon's self-publishing platform, which is a little different back then, but I did that. I self-published all three fantasy novels at once. So
Wow.
that way people didn't have to wait. They could binge read all three books.
And
And
that's what
they
people
started
like to do when you're involved in a book. I don't want to wait for the next one.
exactly. So it started selling and right around that time Amazon, instead of just having a bookstore, they started creating their own publishing companies. So they started with romances and thrillers, and those started off and landed really well. So then they did sci-fi and fantasy. And so they hired an acquisition editor out of the Big Five in New York, and I was like the first person he pitched to them because he found me. They were looking like who are the indie authors in fantasy that are getting some traction. They've got some good reviews and some decent book sales and stuff. And my name came up on the radar screen, and he ended up reading the first Muirwood book in one sitting. And he's like, this reminds me of the fantasy of my teenage days. Like this is the kind of stuff I like to read. And so he got their permission and they reached out to me and they offered me a 6 book deal. The 3 books that I had self-published and the next trilogy that I was writing. And I was like I was at my day job. I was in a meeting at Intel when this email comes in like we'd like to talk to you about acquiring your series. And the last thing I wanted to do was be on a phone call with a peer. And I just couldn't wait. I remember I sent the email to my wife and she wrote back like, like what
The
is going
moment
on?
we've been waiting for.
Yeah, and so as soon as I got off that call, I started researching like Amazon publishing. What's this? And I started like, oh, this is a real thing. Okay. They're part of the biggest bookstore in the world. Having them want your book, maybe that's going to be okay. And so I had a couple phone conversations with Amazon. They offered me that 6 book deal, and I accepted it. And then they put some new covers on Muirwood. They're the ones who picked my narrator. Oh, Kate Rudd, she is such an awesome narrator. And so they chose her, and then they re-released Muirwood with the new covers and stuff, and it sales just went like crazy. And so then I started releasing the next series, and it wasn't until I was, finishing writing that next trilogy that I'm like, Amazon, I could write a lot faster if I didn't have this pesky day job. And so we're able to work out a publishing contract where I was able to, deliver. They gave me a contract to do 3 books in one year instead of 1 book a year. And once I was able to do that with the other 6 books, I was earning more from my writing than I was at Intel. And at that point, it just made sense to say, why don't I leave Intel and then write these next 3 books, full time. And I've been doing that ever since. It's been over 10 years now.
That is so inspiring, and I can see like the passion and the excitement in your eyes when you're talking about that. So, congratulations on all your success and the amazing, beautiful books that you've written. I have what advice would you give to someone starting? Like they're on their journey. Let's say they have the book, it's written, they've sent it to the editors, I have a manuscript. Now what?
Well, you really have to choose which path you want to do. Do you want to go the traditional route and try to get one of the big publishers or smaller publishers because they still know a lot of the process of editing, cover design. There's a lot of business that's part of it. And so, if you don't want to deal with that, then going the traditional route, but then you have to wait for the gatekeepers to accept you. And that can be very frustrating if you want to keep writing novels and they're not out there yet.
Oh,
So you have to decide whether you want to go that route or whether you want to go the indie route. With the indie route, you can get your book out a lot easier. But if you don't spend the time learning the business side of it, learning about things like Amazon ads, meta ads, how do you find good cover designer? Like, how do you find editors? Because no matter how you might be an English major, no person is going to see their own writing objectively enough to be able to know where it needs to really improve. I've got a team of editors that I work with that help make my books the best they can possibly be. So it's no longer the days where it was Wednesday nights me whipping out a chapter all on my own and then going to Intel the next day. I write the book, I read it, and then I send it off to my editorial team to get their feedback. I've got a group of early readers that are family and friends that, have been following me for years and years. I give them the first crack at it to get their feedback because as it might be as clear as can be to me, but another set of eyes is going, this is confusing. I'm not sure what you mean.
right.
And so having that feedback, I just don't think people can really provide that on their own. But you've got to learn the business side and things about taxes and deductions and all that stuff. So both routes are still viable, both routes are still accessible, but a lot of people are choosing the indie route because then they don't have that gatekeeper anymore. But if you don't have a team that you're getting behind you, then you also risk putting something out there that's not professional and readers. we'll let you know.
You've just inspired me a lot. I mean, you've said so many wonderful things about your creative flow process, the business side. You mentioned to me that you write a book every 3 months. What I'm sure that wasn't always the case. How do you do that? Like, what is your process? Do you just wake up in the morning? Do you do a meditation, have a cup of coffee, lock all the pets and the kids outside? Or what is your process to be able to get that done?
So for me, I have found that writing 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, is the beat rate. It's the pace that I can perform at effortlessly forever. I know authors that write 5 days a week. I know authors that write 6 days a week. I know authors that write 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong, but I know for me, if I don't have a break in between writing sessions, if I try to do too much, I start to experience some burnout. And
Wow.
so I was trying to find what's the pace. I knew when I was working at Intel that I could write more than one chapter a week. But I wasn't sure when I left my job, can I do more than that? And I said, let me try doing 3 chapters a week and see if I can do that. And I just found that, yeah, that is a sustainable pace for me. So it takes me approximately 2 hours to write that chapter, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. And I do it in the morning after the kids have gone to school, after the pets have been fed. And I usually I start around 8 o'clock in the morning and I'm typically done with that writing session, that creative session by 10 o'clock. And so what I'm working on in any given week is the new novel. And then I'm working on copy edits on a previous one. And then I'm answering fan mail or working on the social media strategy or writing a newsletter. There's lots of pieces of the business end that I need to do throughout the day. But that closed door, white noise machine, keep the pets outside, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for about 2 hours a pop. And that's what I need to be able to create. And at that pace, it takes me 3 months to write a book. And if I keep going, I was doing about three a year. And then recently I've been doing four a year because I'm like, why waste 3 months when I can generate another book? If instead of taking a big break in between novels, if I just start the planning of the next one right away and jump into it. And so that's the pace I've been
Wow.
doing for the last
How many
couple of
chapters do you write in those 2 hours?
I just do one. My goal
One
is to write
chapter.
one chapter,
So 3 chapters a week, basically.
3 chapters a week. And so that ends up being a novel every 3 months.
And where do you get the inspiration and the ideas if it's not a series, right? It's a totally new book. Where do you get the inspiration? Suddenly it's 3 months, I'm ready for my next book. How do you keep your voice fresh and the ideas new and exciting without maybe repeating some of the things that you've done in the past?
That's where the creativity process blends with always feeding my mind with things. I feed my mind by traveling. I feed my mind by reading a lot of nonfiction. I love reading biographies. I love reading business books. I love reading self-help books like Atomic Habits. Oh my gosh, love stuff like that.
Great book.
Um, and so I'm always feeding. I'm always listening to an audiobook. I'm also reading fiction too. And as I'm exploring those things, sometimes something will jump out at me and be like, oh, this could be an idea for something. This could be just the beginnings of an idea for something. And I have on my desk here one of my favorite quotes. I got it from my publisher gave it to me, and they put it on a little notebook here, a little leather bound thing. And it's a quote from the Roman philosopher Ovid. And this is probably my all-time favorite quote. And it says, "A new idea is delicate. It can be killed by a sneer or a yawn. It can be stabbed to death by a quip and worried to death by a frown on the right man's brow." And so when I come across a new idea, whether it might be a sentence in a book, it might be a scene in a television show, it might be a castle I visited in England or a valley I went to in Switzerland, when something comes to me, I jot the idea down and then I'll email it to myself. And I've got a certain folder that I keep those ideas. And I just let it incubate. Like
Mm.
I won't, like if I'm working on something, I won't spend a lot of time thinking about it. But as I'm getting near the end of a series and maybe I'm on the last month, I'll go like, what do I want to do next? I'll go to that folder and I'll start browsing through and I'll see which one of these delicate ideas have sprouted. And oh, this one's still a little too early. Let me see what's next. And so throughout any given year, I probably get maybe 4 to 6 new ideas.
Wow,
And
that is
so
great advice.
and that's more than I have time to write in
Yeah.
any given year. So I'll just collect them idea. I'll put them in my little greenhouse of my email folder, and I'll just let the sun shine. I won't kick any of them out. I won't be like, that's a dumb idea, because like some of my best ideas came from that little garden. And that was like, oh, it's time to tell this story. Now I can see the character who's going to be leading this story, or the plot, or the magic system. Or sometimes I'll take two different ideas and I'll smash them together and be like, what if I took this idea and this idea, and how a little collision go on? That's part of my creative process of is just taking two different things and smashing them together to see what happens.
That's awesome. And where what legacy are you hoping your work leaves behind?
The thing that touches me the most is when I hear from readers that have said that, my stories and kind of the values and the thoughtfulness and even the spirituality I put into my books have helped them during hard times. I get that a lot. And it's just so touching to me that just a fun imaginary story that I came up with has helped. In fact, an author friend of mine was substitute teaching a class, and a student had left her backpack behind. And so she wasn't sure who the student was. So she opened up the backpack, and the only thing in the backpack was one of my books.
Wow.
And so, this other author knew me and was like, and so the girl came running back in and was like, oh, I left my backpack. Like, oh, you're reading Jeff Wheeler. It's like, oh, he's my favorite author. She's like, well, I know him. And so she texted me and told me that story. And I said, find out what her favorite book is. I'll sign a copy and I'll get it to you to give to her.
That's
And that just happened last weekend. And she took a picture with this girl and she said this girl has social anxiety. She's like always kind of sitting in the corner and stuff. But because of, I'd gotten her that book, she gave this substitute teacher a hug, you know, and I'm just like, that's just so cool. That's just awesome that you touch people with your words and your stories. And even though it's pretend and make believe, there's still truths in there that you can express, and those truths can touch people. And to me, that's the legacy I hope that people will be reading my books long after I'm gone, and hopefully feeling something and learning something about themselves or about other people that they maybe wouldn't have learned any other way.
That is so beautiful and so amazing. Your books definitely have some big soul ideas of transformation and wisdom and spirituality, and definitely touching the hearts of a lot of souls. Jeff, so to wrap things up, for our listeners, where can anybody find you? Tell us a little bit more about your work, and where can we connect and read your books and your favorite ones and the ones coming out.
Well, the question I get the most is like, well, you've got like over 30. Where do I start?
Great.
I actually recommend people go to my website, jeff-wheeler.com. I have a newsletter. If you sign up for that, you'll get some free stories from me. So that way you can, if you're not sure, you can just
I've
come by my
downloaded
website.
mine.
You can get either Muirwood or part of Invisible College, and you can see which one of those appeals to you, and then you can look at that. But on the top of my website it has a reading order, and that's my suggestion because a lot of my fantasy worlds are interconnected, and so some people don't want spoilers. And you can start anywhere you want, but I have a suggested reading order. I have people start with King Fountain because when I start, crossing worlds, if you read it in the order I suggest it, there's fewer spoilers that are going to happen. But that's something people like about my writing is that they're interconnected and that some magics you might find across the different worlds. And it just makes you wonder, like, how connected really are these places? But I tell people to go to my website. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, but my newsletter is how I prefer to interact with fans. I literally will respond to my fans when they reply back to my newsletters. And I just think it's awesome to be able to engage with my fans directly.
And do you want to tell everyone the name of your newsletter?
Um, my website I kind of call the Worlds of Jeff Wheeler. But again, just go to jeff-wheeler.com and join. There's a newsletter button there, and that's where it you begin to learn about my writing journey and some of the books that have meant so much to my fans.
Great. Well, Jeff, this has been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you so much for coming on and blessing our listeners with so much knowledge, so much, just passion, excitement, your process, your inspiration, your imagination, and a little bit about your family. Thank you again. And for anybody listening, if you love this channel, make sure you subscribe for more to come. Thank you again, Jeff.
You're welcome. Great to see you again, Julie.
Thank you.